Second John this morning, and we're going to tackle the entire book in one message because it's only one chapter, 13 verses. I've really enjoyed studying through the Gospel of John and then the letters of John and seeing the consistency of the message. And really, I think that the letters of John really focus in on this heart of the gospel. And I've titled the message this morning, Love One Another and Reject Deceivers. Because as we studied 1 John, we noted that there were false teachers that had gone out from among these believers and were teaching really another gospel. They were teaching something other than salvation by Jesus Christ. And they were not teaching Jesus was God. And so there were these deceivers. And so we're going to see this theme continue in this book of 2 John this morning. Well, if you would, I'm going to read, if you'd follow along with me, I'm reading from the English Standard Version this morning. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all those who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us, from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing a new commandment, but the one we have heard from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you. So this morning we're going to walk through this passage together, and really I see it as divided into kind of four sections, the fourth really being the conclusion there. In the first section I've entitled The Truth, because we see John use the word truth several times through these first few verses. This is, obviously the greeting, but each of the greetings in each of these letters are like finely tuned to what the author wants to say. And so John has tuned this greeting around the truth. He says, the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth. Whom I love in the truth. Now, first, I just want to address the elder is obviously the author, which we believe is John, the apostle, and the elect lady. There's a couple of different ways that this could be interpreted, but I personally take the meaning of elect lady to be a church that he's writing to, and it's because it says and her children, and then later on, it talks about that we love one another. Dear lady, and now I ask you, dear lady, writing to the church. There are other people who believe that this was like an individual, a lady. But, we talk about, say America, the beautiful, we talk and we use the pronouns like, she and her. And so I believe John is really looking at this church as the elect lady. He's writing to a church. And remember, in 1 John, he was writing, he did not have a specific person he was addressing. It was probably a circulated letter. But now he's writing specifically to this church because he has a specific burden for these. And her children would be those believers within the church, maybe those who had come to know Christ while in the church. Maybe they were young in the faith, but nonetheless, he uses this phrase, and I believe he's talking about the believers within a specific church. But he goes on and he says, whom I love in the truth. And not only I, but also all those who know the truth. And we know and then it goes on even, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. We know Jesus in John 14:6, in that night before he was betrayed and taken to be crucified, he told the disciples, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so perhaps this is part of, John likes his double meanings. He uses words sometimes in a way that is kind of like means multiple things. And I think he's probably specifically referring here to Jesus and also the truth of the word that Jesus communicated. And so, I love in the truth, and those who also know the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. And so then he goes on and says, grace, mercy, and peace. And now I think the King James does not use this phrase, will be with us. But I understand this is worded differently in the Greek, that it is a will be with us. And it's a confidence. It's not just, I pray that grace and mercy will be with you. No, it's firmer than that. It's grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son. And again, he comes back and he says, in truth and love. And so those two concepts are integral to this greeting that he gives here. And then he says, I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth. Again, he brings up this word truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And so, this is the greeting, but John is very much centering it on truth. And he's repeated this over and over again. So there's this idea of truth. And this is important because, as we are going to see further on, we see these deceivers who are not preaching the truth. And so John is, basing the whole greeting of the book, the whole foundation is founded on the truth. And then he starts out, and really this is where he turns to something that he wants the believers there to take note of and to make sure that they're following this commandment. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing a new commandment. We've heard that phrase before in 1 John, where he says, this isn't a new commandment I'm writing. And even Jesus said that. But the one we had from the beginning. In other words, the one you knew from the beginning. And what is that commandment? Well, it was the verse we recited this morning, that we love one another. That we love one another. And so we know that Jesus, and I'll go ahead and read John 15:12-17. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I've made known to you. You didn't choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it you. He may give it to you. These things I command you so that you love one another. So, Jesus is, he said a whole bunch of different things here, but he's bookended it with, love one another. This is my commandment, that you love one another. And then the end of that paragraph, he says, these things I command you so that you will love one another. And so John is really, this is not from a new commandment. This is the commandment Jesus gave, and this is the commandment undoubtedly that John preached. And so he says, love one another. And then he goes on in verse 7, and he's now turning to another topic. He's turning to deceivers. And I think this is, having laid the foundation in truth and having emphasized the commandment to love one another, which would be really the core of what we do as followers of Christ. Now he turns and he says, for many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. So there are those who have gone out into the world, and they're deceivers, he says. They don't believe Jesus Christ came in the flesh. And remember how John began the first epistle, where he said, we've seen with our eyes, not just we saw him. No, we saw with our very eyes. We heard him with our very ears. We touched him. This is John who laid his head on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper. And John has said, I experienced Jesus directly. I can tell you he's real, he's true, and he came in the flesh. And John now goes on and he's talking about these deceivers who do not confess the coming of Jesus in the flesh. He says, such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist. And we understand the word antichrist is kind of a loaded term. I mean, obviously we are maybe on the doorstep of the coming of the Antichrist. We don't know, but we know that that John has used the word Antichrist in a number of times in 1 John and in Second John, and so the Antichrist is really it's not just one Antichrist. There is one. But it's the spirit of Antichrist and the spirit of deception. Remember what Jesus said to the Jewish leaders. He said, you're of your father, the devil. He's a liar from the beginning. He also said he's a murderer from the beginning. And so, these things are, Antichrist, opposed to Christ. So not only are these not preaching Christ come in the flesh, but they're actually opposed to Christ. He says, watch yourselves. Watch yourselves. Be on guard, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Now, I take this to mean that, he and those that are with John, John and the church love Christ. And he's already affirmed that earlier in the letter. He said, the truth is in us. And those who know the truth, who know Jesus Christ. And so now he says, we don't want to lose what we have worked for. We are, we know Christ and we're preaching Christ crucified. We don't want to taint that message. Actually, you would more than taint that message. If you fell into this trap of these deceivers, these antichrist, these ones that are preaching another gospel, essentially, then you would more than taint the message. You would totally change the message. It wouldn't be a message of Christ crucified because they don't even believe in Christ. So we don't want to put at risk the preaching of Christ crucified. No, we want the full, and it's not so much that we're working to have a reward, but the outcome of preaching Christ is that others would come to know him as Savior. And if we were to adopt the teaching of these false teachers, then we would not see people come to Christ. That full reward would vanish. And then he says, he once again refers to the deceivers. He says, everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. This is as if he's saying, so these who maybe they previously professed Christ, but now they've said, well, there's a new doctrine. They've gone on ahead to a new thing. And we have this in our world today, don't we? There are many who have left the fundamental teaching of Jesus and moved on to something new, something, moved, and they view it as moved ahead. The world will use phrases like enlightened, or there's a lot of phrases going around even right now. And so these who have moved on in their minds, they've moved on to a new doctrine. They don't abide in the teaching of Christ. And he says they do not know God. They do not have God. However, on the contrary, whoever abides in the teaching of Christ crucified, of Christ come in the flesh, whoever abides in that teaching has both the Father and the Son. Apparently these deceivers thought they were, had God, but they wouldn't preach Christ. And John says, well, if you are abiding in the teaching of Christ come in the flesh and crucified, then you have both the Father and the Son. And notice in the verse 7 at the beginning, it says, for many deceivers. And I would submit that one of the real problems we have in our world today, maybe in the church today, is that there are many deceivers. But how many are preaching the truth? How many are preaching the gospel? Well, John goes on, and now he's addressing really these believers in this church, that the children of this elect lady. He says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your home or give him any greeting. For whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Now, at first glance, that may sound a little harsh. We have to understand something, what John is really getting at, and we have to understand really hospitality, especially in that culture. It's a little different than our culture today, but in that culture, if you had someone in your home, prepare a meal for them, or you went to their home, this was a major, a significant thing. This was no small thing. And I want to read from the commentary that I've been following, Colin Cruz. He says, because hosts acted as guarantors for their guests to the rest of the community, and because Christian greetings generally carried a recognition of the true Christian standing of those greeted and involved a blessing on them, the elder knew that it was not possible for his readers to greet the secessionists without that greeting implying a recognition of the secessionists. Christian standing and thus identifying of the secessionist Christian standing and thus identifying themselves with the secessionists. The wicked work, of course, was propagating aberrant teaching, error in teaching. And if his readers greeted these people or took them into their houses, they would be associating themselves with this work. I don't know if you remember in the book of Acts when Paul first became saved, he needed to be accompanied by I think it was Barnabas who accompanied him to vouch for Peter's message, Peter's salvation. They didn't just want someone new, Paul. to come in and start preaching, isn't this the guy that was killing Christians? And so Barnabas vouched for him. This is the idea of, you're acting as a guarantor. You're saying that these are true believers. And so to have them as guests, to greet them, carried with it more than just a, hi, my name is Scott, how are you doing? That was not the idea of greeting. Greeting was more than that. And it implied this idea of vouching for someone and for their message and for their wicked works. And so John was saying, you can't have part in that. You can't welcome them in. It would be as if you had someone come in and let them speak to the church. It would be akin to that. And you can't do that. You can't allow false teachers to do that. So therefore, you have to know if they're false teachers. You have to listen to their message. And, John, again, I pointed this out when we were going through 1 John, but John is very specific as to what he's calling false teaching. He's not just saying, any doctrine. He's saying specifically, they're not teaching Christ. They're not teaching Christ. I'm not saying there's no other flavor of false teachers. I'm just saying that John was very concerned that Christ be the message that they're bringing. And if he's not the message that they're bringing, then it's not the teaching that comes from the Father. Lest we think that this is a harsh statement, not to have anything to do with them, we can remember what Jesus told his disciples. Remember, he sent his disciples out in Matthew chapter 10, and he said, as you enter the house, greet it, and if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. So this is very much in keeping with Jesus' teaching to his disciples. And again, in John 15, if we were to continue we read earlier the passage, love one another, and the very next verse, verses 18 and 19, Jesus says, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. See, the world knows, and I'm speaking of the world system and the people that are of the world system. They hate us. The world system hates true believers. They won't have anything to do with us. And so really, why would we essentially endorse a false teacher? False teacher is essentially of the world, teaching something other than Jesus. And back in 1 John chapter 2, John said, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires. But whosoever does the will of God abides forever. Now, he's already reminded them, what is the will of God? The fundamental is, Jesus said the two greatest commandments are love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Love one another. So then we come to this last little section here. Really, it's the conclusion to the letter. And John really writes just a couple of verses. longs for joy to be complete or fulfilled. He says, though I have much to write to you, I want to communicate a lot to you, but I'd rather not write it down, use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete, that our joy may be fulfilled. And I don't think he's speaking necessarily in eschatological terms there. I think he's just saying, I really want to see you. That will fill our hearts with joy. But in a sense, there's a sense in which, we are looking forward to that day. Maybe even that he would take us before Jesus comes, or when Jesus comes, and we will see him face to face, and our joy will be complete. Our joy will be fulfilled. And then he concludes simply, the children of your elect sister greet you. And this is why I really think John is in another church, and he's writing to this church, and he says, the children of your elect sister greet you. The members of this church greet you and your members. And so this morning, really what we have is abide in the truth, love one another, and have nothing to do with deceivers. Don't receive them, endorse them in any way. Should we love those who don't know Christ? Yes, we should love them. Should we tell them the message? Sure, we should tell them the message. But there's a difference between telling the message and receiving their message. We long for our joy to be fulfilled, don't we? Which will ultimately happen when we are reunited with Jesus and with our loved ones. Would you join with me as we close in a word of prayer?